Hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop. Hoping you guys all had a good New Year and a good Christmas and good Kwanzaa. Whatever you celebrate, hopefully things have been going well for you guys. So it is officially the first, not only the first That Came From England episode 2022, but also the first video on the channel in 2022, so definitely quite interesting. So for today's episode of That Came From England, I will be talking about and reviewing the third story in Classic Doctor Who, which is very fitting because this episode is going to be uploaded on January 3rd, so very fitting for that. So, Doctor Who story number 3 I'm going to be talking about is a pretty short story. It's only 2 episodes long, so expect this episode to be probably pretty short. So today I'm going to be taking a look at The Edge of Destruction. Now before I talk about the story, I'm going to talk about some of the few behind-the-scenes features related to this story, and mostly the reason why this story was, pretty short. So, Edge of Destruction was basically kind of a filler story for the show, because initially, Doctor Who was only going to, have 13 episodes, which basically spanned, 13 weeks in a row. And seeing that Unearthly Child was 4 episodes, and the Daleks was 7 episodes, the crew had to, come up with a very short story to, last those, what would have been those final 2 episodes. So David Whittaker, who was the writer of the story, he wrote the script in, funny enough, 2 days, which I guess technically means, 1 day per episode, I guess. I don't know. And he based this story on the idea of, trying to, develop, the show's characters and also, kind of have a better idea and grasp of, the TARDIS itself. Seeing that, the first 2 stories, we never really, saw the inside of the TARDIS too much, and also, a majority of the first 2 stories were basically just, focusing on the plots and, the characters trying to solve whatever situation they're in. So, I guess, David Whittaker, wrote this story just to, focus on, some of the aspects that weren't really, touched on within the first 2 stories. So, the story begins right at the very end of the Daleks, where the crew was about to go somewhere else, and the Doctor was attempting to correct the TARDIS's navigation circuits, but in the end ended up having an explosion happen, which knocked pretty much everybody in the TARDIS, unconscious for a little while. After a little while, everybody, wakes up, and, Ian and Barbara tend to have, a slight case of amnesia, and, we're kind of unsure what was going on. And throughout, most of this story, everybody in the TARDIS, starts to, act strangely and also, turn against one another. And during the events of the story, the Doctor accuses, both Ian and Barbara for sabotage for what was going on in the TARDIS. He suspected that, Ian and Barbara were probably taken over by some sort of alien force, or that Ian and Barbara were intentionally trying to sabotage the TARDIS just so the Doctor would take him back to 1963. So, as a response to that, he offered Ian and Barbara some drinks, which, ended up, kind of being like a sleeping drug, so both of them ended up going to sleep. But, the Doctor, of course, was unaware that, Ian, who was also very suspicious of the Doctor himself, Ian didn't take the drug and, was trying to stop the Doctor from, trying to touch the TARDIS console. But then over the course of the story, or in this case, episode 2 of the story, it becomes a bit more clear that, it wasn't Ian and Barbara who was, trying to, stop the TARDIS, from working. It was actually just, the TARDIS itself trying to warn the crew that something was wrong. And Barbara was one of the first ones to, figure out this problem, and the Doctor then soon, finds out what the problem of itself was, and it ended up being that there was a broken spring in the fast return switch. And because of this problem with the fast return switch, the TARDIS was, heading back to where the beginning of time was, and strange events that were happening within the TARDIS were the attempts by the TARDIS to warn the passengers about the ship, being on the the edge of destruction, or obviously the ship itself being destroyed, hence the title, Edge of Destruction. And so the Doctor soon fixes the switch, and then everything's back to normal, and while, everybody was, rejoiced about, like, the TARDIS getting back to normal. Barbara was still, pretty upset by, like, the Doctor's harsh words to her and Ian, earlier in the story about, like, accusing them of sabotage, and also, at one point in the story, the Doctor was, like, considering, throwing Ian and Barbara out of the TARDIS, because he assumed that they were, ruining it. And so, at the very end of the story, the Doctor apologizes to Barbara, and he admits that, he was wrong about them, and, he pretty much told Barbara that, like, she was pretty much the one who saved them all, and, this is kind of like, after watching this was pretty much the part of Doctor Who where you really started to see, like, the Doctor, like, actually started to, care for Ian and Barbara, and, I honestly really liked that. That pretty much shows that, like, the Doctor is not just this, grumpy old man kind of character, but, he does have a heart of gold. And after, the Doctor's speech to Barbara, the TARDIS, lands in, like, a snowy area where Susan, sees a giant footprint in the snow. And I'm assuming this is pretty much where, the beginning of Marco Polo happens, but seeing that Marco Polo is a missing story, and, all 7 episodes are missing, and as of right now, there's no animation of it yet. I honestly, can't review Marco Polo for now until that happens, but yeah, with that being said, that's pretty much what happened in The Edge of Destruction. So I might as well talk about my personal thoughts about The Edge of Destruction. So, overall, I think it's, pretty decent story. Definitely not, honestly, between Unearthly Child, the Daleks, and, this one, I think Edge of Destruction is probably the weakest of the first 3 Doctor Who stories, but definitely not bad in my opinion. It has some good moments. Like I said earlier, the ending with the Doctor and Barbara, but overall it was it was kind of confusing for a while up until we found out what the solution was. But yeah, and also it was pretty weird throughout the whole story. Seeing kind of the characters turning against one another, especially with Susan threatening to kill Ian and Barbara with, like, a pair of scissors, which, honestly, not the most threatening weapon, but, like, oh well. And funny thing about that scene, it was the board, the BBC program board directors, were actually very concerned about, like, the scene with, like, Susan and the scissors, and yeah, that was they mentioned that, like, oh, it kind of violated the code about, like, violence and whatnot. I don't know what was going on, but, like, yeah, I found that kind of funny because this kind of proved that, like, Doctor Who, like, even, like, way after this story came out, Doctor Who has always had, like, a lot of controversies, in the classic era, for its depiction of violence, like, obviously there was the infamous episode 3 cliffhanger of The Deadly Assassin, a good portion of Colin Baker's era also had some controversy over violence. Yeah, the subject of violence Doctor Who has always been debated about, even in its early days. And one of the more interesting things about The Edge of Destruction that I kind of want to point out, in this video, there was a particular scene, and this scene's been, pretty much floating, all around the fandom, a lot of people pretty much know about this scene. It's, unintentionally pretty funny. In the one scene where, like, the Doctor was, like, accusing Ian and Barbara for sabotage, there was literally a moment where, like, the Doctor himself stutters, when he was talking to them. He was like, oh, well, you said something like that. I don't know. I would play the full clip, but, like, I'm kind of concerned that, like, I'd probably get copyright claimed by the BBC, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, there was literally a scene where, William Hartnell, who was playing the Doctor, kind of, messed up his lines while it was recording. And, I find it kind of funny how they actually kept that, in the final production. I guess at the time they didn't have much time for, like, to, like, rehearse, so that's probably, why that happened. But it's pretty, funny. The Doctor, sort of, speaking gibberish for little moments. It was one of the more, like, unintentionally funny parts of, Doctor Who, I would say. And I've read jokes, not jokes, I've read comments on the internet, from people, saying, oh, You know, that it was just the doctor speaking Gallifreyan or something, you know, when he was stuttering. I don't know. Yeah, it was pretty funny. It wasn't meant to be funny, but like, you know, it ended up coming out that way. So with this pretty short and sweet review out of the way, Edge of Destruction, you know, while being pretty short and, you know, pretty easy to watch through, the story itself, not really the best. Like I said before, kind of weird, you know, seeing some of these characters, like, you know, kind of being out of character, especially Susan, you know, that's, you know, pretty weird, but the ending was really good, and, you know, honestly, you know, pretty decent watch. If there was, like, you know, if you don't have enough time to, like, you know, watch a full, you know, 4 or 6 episode long Doctor Who story and, you know, want to watch something, you know, pretty quickly, Edge of Destruction, you know, will be, I would say, a decent watch, you know. With, you know, 2 episodes, it's only, like, you know, less than an hour long, which is basically, you know, the length of, like, 1 full episode of Modern Who, so pretty easy watch. But in general, I would give The Edge of Destruction a rating of 6.5 out of 10. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my little discussion and review of The Edge of Destruction. And like I said earlier in the video, I'm not going to be covering Marco Polo until we have like an animation for it. So yeah, I'm going to skip Marco Polo for next time, and I'll be jumping straight into the story after Marco Polo, you know, the next time I review a Doctor Who story. If you guys enjoyed this, feel free to give it a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of The Cave from England, or just mediocre plush content in general. And leave a comment down below letting me know what you think. That is about it. This is Tyler from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, I will be reviewing the next Doctor Who story, or at least, you know, story number 5, because, you know, I can't review Marco Polo yet until the animation before it comes out. But next time when I review Doctor Who, this next story that I'm going to be talking about pretty much goes all over the place. Like, literally goes all over the place. With that being said, if you guys liked this, feel free to give a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of The Cave for Game. Oh my god.